But what about the roads? Who is going to build the highways? Who is going to police us? Who's going to make the laws? Is pretty much what I have heard every time I have tried to, almost every time I have tried to start a conversation in mixed-ish company about how it's time to dismantle the system and we need new ways of organizing ourselves. So, hello and welcome to the Beautiful Rebellion. This is the first episode of a podcast that I am creating in order to hold space for imaginative conversations from free thinkers about how to organize a more beautiful society on this beautiful earth, one in which more human beings are free, fed, loved, and cared for. If we haven't met, or if you don't know me that well, my name is Dawn Petrin. I am actually the owner of All Connected Digital Marketing. We are a marketing agency where we help free thinking, sovereign focused individuals to grow businesses that give them the free life that they're looking for. And today, I'm not going to talk about anything marketing or business at all. And in fact, this podcast will very rarely be about marketing or business. What this podcast is about is moving through something that I think might be a collective block for most of society these days, which is that we have this real difficulty in imagining that things could be any other way than they are right now. We can look to the past and most of us feel like we're in a better place than we were in the past. And I'm not negating that, but I think especially these days, it's August 9th, 2025, especially these days, so many people know that the way that we are being governed and the way that we are organizing is not working for most of us. And we have so much trouble imagining a different way that that might go. So the premise of this podcast is that I will be bringing on thinkers and philosophers and artists and just regular people, because we are all of those things, these things. And we will be having conversations about different ways of being that are more spirit first, filled with love, and that trust maybe a little bit more deeply in the nature of human beings. This first podcast, though, I'm going to go super nerdy and bring you all the way back. It's like from Wayne's World, if you know. Bring you all the way back to when I was in my early 20s studying political philosophy at the University of Alberta. And I was literally blown away by The Republic by Plato. And I have notes, but also the book. The Republic opens. This is Alan Bloom's copy. The Republic opens with Socrates saying, "I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon, son of Ariston, to pray to the goddess, and at the same time I wanted to observe how they would put on the festival, since they were now holding it for the first time. So I went down to the Piraeus yesterday with Glaucon, son of Ariston, which I believe is also Socrates' father." That was something I just realized I hadn't really realized deeply before. And it keeps going. I'm not going to read it all to you, but what happens is that Socrates and Glaucon are leaving the festivities, and they run into, what's his name again? Polemarchus. I don't know how to pronounce any of these. I don't think anyone really knows how to pronounce ancient Greek, but they run into Polemarchus, who is a friend of Socrates, and they are invited over for dinner and conversation to his home. So this is where it gets really nerdy, and this is where I got super blown away when I was first learning this with Dr. Studer. Hi, Heidi. Back in 2002. I guess, because the Piraeus is like a port city that is literally down from Athens, but also is a place where there's a little bit more freedom. It's a little bit less like buttoned up, not that they were buttoning up because they were wearing togas, and where conversations could be a little bit more loose, a little bit more free. The port cities, if you imagine port cities, there's often people coming, going from all over. And there might be casinos or brothels or just things that you're not going to find in like more tight-knit society where everyone is supposed to be or is trying to be prim and proper. So this is one of the big things about this book, is that Socrates is starting out at the beginning to say, like, we're going down into a place where conversations can be more free. And then on top of that, they're in Polymarchus's home, which means they're not at the assembly in Athens. They don't have to be prim and proper, and they could actually safely and as a thought exercise imagine how society could be organized differently. Spoiler alert, I kind of want this podcast to be similar to Polymarchus's living room in the Piraeus. So, told you it was going to be nerdy. It's just getting more nerdy. The next thing I want to speak about is how philosophy is the question of what is the good life, right? And then political philosophy is the question of like, how do we organize or govern ourselves, or a lot of it is like how to rule in order to get the good life for the most amount of people, or maybe the right people. And so Socrates and his compadres, are in Polymarchus's living room, and they are having conversations about how the world could be, or how the country, the state, the city-state of Athens could be governed in a even better way. So remember, they had a democratic assembly, sort of democratic. We always look at them and we're like, oh, it was a democracy, but it was a democracy of titled land titled men who owned property were allowed to vote in the direct democracy in Athens. Women were not, slaves were not, etc. That's a side note. I'm going to try and keep this short and less nerdy, so I'm going to keep moving. It's not getting less nerdy, but in this conversation in Polymarchus's living room, they came to the idea that the best possible way that mankind could be governed would be an omniscient, benevolent dictator, right? Someone who knew the best for everyone and had all of the powers of the world and could do it, and then would tell everyone what to do. And then they said, since that's not possible, let's imagine a different way. And I am paraphrasing from like 20 years ago. I have the book, but I haven't reread it recently. I just needed to share. So anyway, they are imagining a different way that things could be. And Socrates sets out, or they set out together actually, via the Socratic method, the idea that, okay, we can't have a benevolent, omniscient dictator. That doesn't exist, at least not in our world. But what we could do is have a class system where there would be the rulers, the warriors, and everyone else. We have the rulers, and the rulers would be the philosopher kings, the closest thing you could get to omniscient, benevolent dictator. And then the warrior class would be, the people who are making sure that the city state or the state is safe. It's for defense, and it's also in order to give the spirited young men somewhere to like put their energy. I'm not going to get into it today, but a lot of political theory is like a lot of political theory from Plato's time to now really is about like what do we do with the spiritedness of young men, right? And that's like where sports and anyway, I'm not doing Machiavelli today, but maybe I will if someone wants me to in the future. So the warrior class is for the spirited, or in ancient Greek, I think they called it thumos. Side note, I'm definitely going to get a thumos tattoo someday. I feel like I'm spirited too. And the warrior class, it's like both to protect and uphold society, but also to give these like energetic young men something to do with all that testosterone. And then we have the producers. These are like the artisans and the merchants and the the farmers and, the people who make society happen, make it run, right? Um, and so that was the idea. The perfect way of being would be that when you were born, you were put into a class, and from that, you were like perfectly prepped, basically raised with, the love, the food, and the practices and lessons that you would need in order to fulfill your role in society. Now, the thing about that is, though, if you are trying to separate people into classes and tell them you can be a ruler, but you need to be a farmer, some people might get a little angry, right? And especially if that spiritedness isn't properly and purposefully expressed in creating safety for the state. And so all those buddies in Polymarchus's living room are chatting, and they're like, well, how are we going to get everyone to go along with it? And so Socrates invents the idea, I'm pretty sure it was Socrates, invents the idea of the noble lie. And the noble lie would be something that was in the mythos of this society for all time, or that they would be convinced that it was. And that was that the gods and the goddesses had put different metals into the souls of people, and that those who were part of the the philosopher king class, they had gold in their souls. The warrior class had silver in their souls. And then the everybody else that's getting everything done class had bronze in their souls. I'm going to pause and recap. Socrates went down to the Piraeus. So he left Athens, where you needed to be a tight-knit, living by the rules sort of human being. He went to see a festival for a goddess who isn't even part of the Athens pantheon. And then he ended up in the living room of a friend down at the Piraeus, where he could be having an imaginative conversation about how society could be better organized than the current direct democracy of land-owning men that there were in Athens. Through their conversation, and we're only going up to book 3 today of the Republic, but through their conversation, they established that the best possible way that humankind could be governed would be through a benevolent, omniscient dictator. But since that wasn't possible, that people should be split into 3 classes: the philosopher kings, the warriors, and the everybody else who's getting everything done. And the way that we will convince everyone to not fight and actually try to change their place in society is that we will convince them that they have been born with a certain type of metal in their soul, and that is the noble lie that will help them to realize that society is organized correctly. And I think the noble lie is something that most societies actually have. I'm not going to go into it, but I've thought this often with yoga, and the caste system is a bit of a noble lie to stop people from different classes to try and move up or down them. Anyway, coming back to it, I think that we are living under a noble lie as well. Of course. And I believe we probably are living under many noble lies, but the one I want to talk about today is the social contract. So, back to my notes. In 1651, Hobbes wrote Leviathan, and that's not like a giant whale monster in the sea. He was writing about, the way that humanity should be organized and governed. And Hobbes said, and I quote, in the state of nature, okay, I paraphrase. In the state of nature, mankind's lot is nasty, brutish, and short. In the state of nature, man is always warring against each other, and that nature is actually warring against man as well. And so man has decided, and when I say man, I mean capital M, man, woman, all of us. Man has decided to give up some of or most of our freedoms in order to have the government to care for us. So That's the social contract. We've given up our freedoms in order to have the government, or in this time, this was like kings and queens, rulers, to care for us. And that's the kings and queens' job. They care for us. And, we are just so grateful that they have, God's right to rule. And that is why we're healthier. That's why we're safe. And that's why, like France isn't coming and invading. Okay, so that's Hobbes. And then in 1657, just the continuation of this idea of the social contract, John Locke came in and he wrote the two treaties of government, really as an answer, I believe, to Leviathan from Hobbes. And his premise was like, actually, like in the state of nature, things are generally pretty not bad, but they're unstable. Locke also brings forth the premise that man has these inalienable rights, life, liberty, and property, and that our social contract is to protect these rights. And the only reason that they would get taken away is like if we come into a super unstable time. And makes me think of like when the Canadian government starts to use the emergency act. Anyway, I would say Trudeau probably would be like, John Locke said I could. Okay, and then I want to talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote The Social Contract in 1762. And his idea is that man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. And he says that true authority actually comes from the general will. So like the shared interest of all. And I feel like that's a little bit of like the noble lie that's we're told in terms of like democracy, really. I'm not saying I'm against democracy. I'm not saying anything yet. I just want to be in conversation about it. But one thing that really shook me when I was reading Rousseau about 20 years ago was that he said that freedom, and hold on, I'm going to paraphrase from my remembering. He said that real freedom is being so far under the yoke of the law that you believe that you created them. Talk about noble lie, right? Literally, freedom is being so in the law, so in the noble lie that you believe you are free because you agree with the rules. Okay, so maybe this is a little bit jumbly. I'm going to come back. We've got Plato. He went down to the Piraeus. They had lots of conversations and they decided to introduce a noble lie that would make society work the way that they think it should. And then we've got Hobbes, we've got Locke, and we've got Rousseau, and they're all talking about the social contract, which is this idea that mankind gives up some of his freedoms in order to be protected by the government or the rulers. Okay, and we are getting close to the end of the first episode, but what I want to say is I believe to a certain extent, one of the noble lies of our society is that the social contract is a thing. It is not. I mean, I think more so it's like in the Republic, there's this character named Thrasymachus, who was a real person, but was not in that room, I'm certain of it, who was a sophist, and he said might makes right. Like justice is that whoever controls the force gets to make the laws. And I think that that is a little bit more the truth than the idea that anyone who is in any society these days actually signed a social contract upon entering it. I did not sign one. I know you didn't sign one. And I do think there are like intentional communities and like literal communes where there actually is a social contract. But for the most part, the people who are ruling are simply ruling because we haven't decided that they shouldn't be anymore. And we haven't decided that they shouldn't be anymore because we have been led to believe that the way things are running is really the only way that things will be able to run well. I think we have also been implanted with the idea that there are only these options. Okay, capitalism, socialism, and like a mixed economy when it comes to economy. And then similarly, when it comes to governance, we've been taught that we could have a democracy where the power comes from the people. We could have a republic, which is a form of representative government. We could have a monarchy, which is like, a king or queen or emperor rules. We could have an oligarchy, which is a rule by a small elite group. By the way, we kind of have that now. We could have an aristocracy where the noble elite class rules. We could have a theocracy, which is like where the government is actually the church. We could have a dictatorship. We could have anarchy, which is absence of formal government, or that's it, right? These are the chances. These are the choices. And it's always that someone is going to be ruling over us. Or in the case of anarchy, there will be total disorder. And I personally am most likely closest to an anarchist, except that I believe that anarchy can be voluntary self-organization, and that people can come together to make decisions and do something like build a road, and then they should dissolve. Because what happens when someone gains power is they just want to keep the power. And I mean, this might not be for everyone, but I think we've seen this over and over again in pretty much every government and every like kingdom that we can remember. So what this podcast is about, I hope, is creating a space like our own living room down in the Piraeus, where brilliant thinkers and imaginative individuals can come and be in conversation about other ways that we can organize as a society and as people, so that we can live a life that is more heart forward, more generous, more giving and caring than the current system, where I don't think I even need to go into the problems with the disparity of ways that people live and ways that we treat our planet. So this is going to be the end of episode 1 of The Beautiful Rebellion. Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to subscribe or follow along on Instagram. I'm either at Dawn_Petron or the_beautiful_rebellion. And I will be doing this by myself some of the time, and I already have some really amazing thinkers lined up for us to be in conversation with. Love to know what you think, though, so drop me a line. Let me know if you think I'm crazy, if you think I'm a little bit too nerdy. Tell me what I got wrong, because like I said, it's been a long time since I studied political theory, but I will tell you, I think about these things every day, and I know that, the beautiful world that our hearts think is possible, paraphrase from Charles Eisenstein, is entirely possible. But the only way we're going to create it is by removing this collective block around our thinking that there are no other ways to live. Thanks for listening and watching. Whew. Officially unmuted.